Welcome to the second annual Stephen H. Schneider Memorial Lecture. This year's lecture is co-organized by Students for a Sustainable Stanford, the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment, and the Haas Center for Public Service. This lecture series is given in honor of Stephen H. Schneider, who was a leader in science communication and a world expert on interdisciplinary climate science. At the time of his death, he was the Melvin and Joan Lane Professor for Interdisciplinary Environmental Studies, professor in the biology department, and a senior fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. His most recent work centered on communicating the possible risks, vulnerabilities, and impacts of climate change to ensure that leaders were sufficiently informed to apply smart risk management strategies in climate policy decision-making. Schneider founded the interdisciplinary journal Climatic Change and continued to serve as its editor-in-chief until his death. He consulted with several federal agencies and White House staff in every US presidential administration since the Nixon era. He was an author of the first 4 assessment reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We are here tonight thanks to Professor Terry Root. Among her many awards and honors, Terry has dedicated her life to making scientific information publicly accessible, as well as reaching out to the student body at Stanford. She is our fearless leader and is the brains and heart behind orchestrating this event. For this, we thank her. We will now show a video describing Steve's life, his passion, and his message.
How did we know in the 1970s pretty much what would happen? It was theory then. And since then, nature's been cooperating with theory, but we kind of knew what was going to happen. You couldn't add 4 watts of energy over every square meter and have nothing happen.
The scientific consensus that CO2 will build up and will be a potential problem is very large. But a scientific consensus on precisely how influential it will be in 10 years or 20 years, what areas climates will get better, what areas will get worse, this is where the controversy comes in.
We also knew that you had to stop using the atmosphere as an unpriced sewer to dump your smokestack and tailpipe waste and your land use change interactions. All of that was known. It was not just in the club of 100 left-brain people. We testified to Congress, we talked to ministers, there were national and international meetings. It was out there. Why didn't we succeed? What happened? Climate science is a system science. It's like trying to understand your body, or trying to figure out something with cancer, or how is the educational system going to work most effectively, and how are we going to do security. Every one of these complex systems problems has multiple components. And when you break them down, what you find out is rarely do we know everything, and rarely do we know nothing. So we have to break system science into the well-established components, which are settled. I'll tell you a few, into competing explanations where our work has been able to get us to winnow it down to 2 or 3 possibilities. Here's where the disconnect comes along. Special interests will grab what's convenient for their ideology or their position. So what you end up with is you end up with a cacophony, typically, of people selecting stuff out of context, and then you end up with the end of the world versus good for you. Now, I'll confess my prejudice. The end of the world and good for you are the 2 lowest probability outcomes. What we are looking at is a multiple range of potential outcomes, and what systems scientists do is they winnow out the relative likelihood of these multiple outcomes. So if you try to cover it as a yes or no, and you go out there and you take a 200 scientist report like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it goes through 3 years of writing, 2 rounds of reviews, 1,000 review comments on every chapter, and then 2 petroleum geologists, who are special interests in finding oil, paid by by you-know-which oil company because they have PhDs that give an equal status in a story or on television. You see, we get a little mad about that, and we call that utter distortion, and they say, oh no, that's balance. It is not balance, it is utter distortion, because they are not reporting the relative credibility of the multiple positions. And it means that you're leaving it up to the public and the political world to figure that out for themselves. They're capable of it, but they rarely do it. How many people in this place, in this fire-prone California, have had a house fire? A few of you. Typically, it's 1% to 2%. How many of you have fire insurance? We already are very risk-averse when we have consequences that matter. We do not need 95% certainty. Here is where, again, people frame this problem by looking for exceptions to the conventional wisdom and claim until the exceptions are resolved, it isn't proved and it's premature to act, yet we're acting on a 1% risk and paying insurance. And here we're talking about 50% risks to the planetary life support system, and they're telling us that's not certain enough. Let's talk about tipping points. So what about Greenland? How could Greenland be a tipping point? Right now, it's melting at an unprecedented rate. The water is rolling down. Nobody knows if the water is freezing on the way down or reaching the bottom. If the water makes it all the way to the bottom, then it's going to heat the bottom and lubricate it. Once you start melting it, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where you could move toward 5 meters of sea level rise and there'd be no way to stop it. What we don't know is, does it need 1 more degree before that happens, 2 or 3? All I can say with high degree of confidence is the more we keep adding unprecedented levels of warming to the system, the more the number of tipping points that are going to be crossed. We know for sure they're there. We don't know for sure where they are. This is not just an academic exercise. This is something we've got to have people deeply engaged in, because we're talking about the sustainability for their children, the grandchildren, and the rest of nature, our behavior. What's the worst thing about tipping points like Greenland? We will probably not know when we've crossed it for 50 years. So our behavior in the next generation could precondition a sustainability issue for a millennium or 10 based upon the convenience of one species for one generation. I find that a very morally daunting prospect.
So what we're really doing is we're insulting our global environment at a faster rate than we're understanding it. And the best we can do, in all honesty, is say, look out, there's a chance of potentially irreversible change at a global scale based upon the benefits of use of energy. And it's very tough for us to know whether those benefits of energy today are worth the potential risks of environmental change.
And we have got to take back the airwaves in a way and make certain that what's out there is more credible, not just simply following some formulaic balance. Thanks very much.
Our speaker tonight, Lisa Jackson, is someone who I'm not sure could have a more impressive resume. After graduating summa cum laude from Tulane University and earning a master's degree in chemical engineering from Princeton, Ms. Jackson worked for the United States Environmental Protection Agency for 16 years. Moving to work in the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in 2002, she became commissioner only 4 years later. And it wasn't long until 2008 when she became chief of staff to the governor of New Jersey. But it doesn't stop there. By early 2009, Ms. Jackson had been nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the US Senate to be the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Serving for 4 years in the position, Ms. Jackson worked to protect our environment in a humanistic way, understanding the environmental injustices suffered by vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, and low-income communities. One of many accomplishments, it was under Ms. Jackson that CO2 and other greenhouse gases became recognized as a threat to public health. Stepping down from the EPA in early 2013, She stepped into being Vice President of Environmental Initiatives at one of the world's largest companies and one of the clear leaders of environmentally conscious technology, Apple Incorporated. Born in Philadelphia and raised in New Orleans, the West Coast has only recently become home to Lisa Jackson. Let's give her a warm welcome now.
Wow, thank you. I can't see you. So I will say anonymously, happy Earth Day, everybody. Thanks for coming. A special thank you to the Students for a Sustainable Stanford. Thank you for making me say that, really at the top while my tongue is still working. And to the Woods Institute and Stanford University for having me. To Terry Root, where's Terry? Professor Terry Root, Dr. Root, thank you for inviting me and for the honor of being the second speaker at this event in honor of your amazing husband and his legacy. I have to give a shout out. You know, in DC we do shout outs. Where's my former cabinet colleagues, Stephen Chu and Jean? Thank you for coming. And maybe David Hayes is here, who worked at the Department of the Interior. Hey. We're the former administration officials who smile a lot right now. And these folks, they're at Stanford. How could they not be smiling? But then I have to save a very special shout out for all the Apple people. You know who you are, who are in the audience. We got our new fan club here. Before I get started, it's just only right that I take a moment to add my words of admiration for Dr. Stephen Schneider. I think for all of us who are scientists, and for those who aren't, to tackle an issue like climate change and to understand how important it is not just to do the science, but then to be able to communicate the science in a way that inspires people to action and activism is something that I think is rare, and unfortunately we need to revive that kind of communication if we're going to make any progress. So speaking of communication, that's what I'm here to do tonight. It is Earth Day. It's the 44th annual Earth Day. If you don't know about Earth Day started in 1970. It was a time of activism and actually teach-ins. There were protests in Washington, D.C. and around the country. The rivers were on fire. We had a huge oil spill. We had air pollution. People look at air pollution in parts of the world today, but we were certainly dealing with some pretty significant air pollution as well. And of course, huge impact in my life. Most people credit the founding of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, our federal environmental agency, with the activism that grew out of Earth Day. The belief that our president then, Richard Nixon, ardent environmentalist, had to do something to assuage the fears of people who were really literally worried about the health of their family. So for me to be able to end this sparklingly beautiful Earth Day here is an incredible honor, and I can't think of a more thrilling way to do it. But I also had a wonderfully thrilling beginning to my day. I went over to the store that we have in the Stanford Shopping Center. And at that store, I saw our retail employees. And today and this week, if you stop by that store, and I encourage you to do so, we've recently remodeled it. You'll see that the employees are wearing green. They also have on green lanyards. All of the computers and the iPads are set to our brand new environment website at Apple, www.apple.com/environment. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. And most striking, the leaf on top of that familiar Apple logo is green. And it looks really good. We're really proud of that. Some of the folks who thought of that are sitting in the audience tonight. It's so cool. But it wasn't just the Stanford store. It was about 90 Apple locations around the world that are recognizing Earth Day the same way today. That includes our Fifth Avenue store in New York City, and Regent Street in the UK, Sydney, Australia, and Pudong in Shanghai. That little green leaf is meant to represent all that Apple has already done, but obviously also to save some place for all that we want to do to reduce our environmental impact. But for me, that little green leaf represents a lot of things. Leaf, in general, represents a new beginning, sort of a sign of spring. It's certainly a new beginning for me personally. You heard in the introduction that I spent 26 years in public service, and now after those 26 years to begin again at Apple. That's pretty cool. Certainly something we're going to talk about tonight. But it's also a new beginning for Apple. It's a beginning of an era of openness and communication about our environmental responsibility, our progress, but also the challenges and goals that we're setting for ourselves that I think is perfect for marking Earth Day with a new commitment to that kind of communication. You can see it in our website, www.apple.com/environment. This just gives you a quick idea if and when you go, and I hope you go. These are some of the things that we talk about on that website. It's part of us at Apple, right? And I think the other part of the beginning, if you will, is to think really strategically about how a company like Apple can really make a difference in the world, can change things for the better. I want to explore all of that with you tonight, and I thought the way to do it was to sort of use that metaphor of a journey. My own personal journey, you heard some of the highlights, but I get asked about it a lot. But also, and I think more interestingly, Apple's journey along this road of environmental protection, communication, and sustainability. All right, so let's start the journey. We will begin in New Orleans, Louisiana. You heard I'm a New Orleanian. That's where I was raised. It's actually, just as an aside, in New Orleans. Anybody from New Orleans? Nobody? Seriously? Thank you. I was waiting, you know, seriously. We love celebrations. I was about to say parties, but I'll say it in a nice way. We love to celebrate things in New Orleans. We look for excuses, so imagine how happy I was when Tim, my boss at Apple, agreed that we could mark Earth Day, because I was like, we gotta do something. So that's kind of, it's very much who I am, very authentic, but I think it was also authentically Apple to take today and really mark it with some opportunities for us to communicate some more. So I grew up in New Orleans. My dad was a mailman, more on that later. My mom was the secretary, but also ran the family. I was really good in school, math and science, so I thought I was going to be a doctor. And I was heading for college. This is my alma mater, Tulane University. Yeah, all right. And so in a foreshadowing of maybe my ultimate destination here at Apple, I like to tell people that it was Tulane University and a really, really cool piece of electronic equipment that really changed the trajectory of me being a doctor to me becoming interested in the environment and being an engineer. I'm talking a really cool device. You ready? TI-30, Programmable Calculator. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Look, it does sines and cosines and the inverses too. So yeah, back when I was in high school as a junior, and if you would agree to go to Tulane for 3 weeks as a student of color, they were trying to get us interested in this thing called engineering, which I had never heard of. I was going to be a doctor. You got one of these. And, you know, all I can tell you, for those of you who are like, seriously, is that it was like the iPad Air of its day. It was a cool tool. It meant I didn't have to look in the back of my book anymore at the sine and cosine tables. No, I did not use the slide rule, but I did use this, and I was thrilled to have it. And so there I am. I decided to go into engineering school. Why? Because I really fell in love with the idea of defining a problem and solving a problem. For me, engineering is all about how you ask the problem and how you define it determines what your solution is going to be and how robust it is. And I love that idea. And then, while I was in school studying chemical engineering, something else was really brewing in our country. It had started when I was in high school, and that was a really vivid example of what happens when businesses don't do right by the environment and what that can mean from public health. And that was at a place called Love Canal. So Love Canal was, it was a hazardous waste site, was what we'd call it now, but back then it was just a place outside of Buffalo, New York. And it was a canal that was started by a man named Alfred, I think, or Albert Love. He thought he would dig this canal and he would use it to generate power and make a lot of money, but he went bankrupt and he was left with a big hole in the ground. So he needed to try to make some money, and so what he did was offer the companies who were in the area the ability to come and dump their gook, highly scientific term, from all their chemical engineering processes into this hole in the ground. And it was in the 70s and the 80s that this country became aware of the fact that this wasn't just happening in Buffalo, New York at Love Canal, but all over the country were these sites that were sort of the unknown and quiet, byproduct of what had become our chemical and petrochemical age. Here I am in engineering school, and I do remember this moment. So for those of you who are students in the audience and wonder about inspiration, I do remember having one lucid thought while I was an undergraduate, and that thought was, if it's the chemical engineers who are making these and designing these processes that make all this waste and result in all these byproducts, who better than a chemical engineer to figure out how to clean it up? And from that point, I was an environmentalist. I always tell that story because environmentalist doesn't always mean that you grew up hiking or fishing or loving the great outdoors. They're all great. But sometimes you're called to the environment from a very different place, and that was certainly where I came from. But I was still an engineer. I truly believed I was going to work in the private sector. I thought I would work to work on environmental issues and still make things better. I just want to do one aside. This is mostly a chronological talk. But I can't talk about New Orleans without talking about the other big thing that happened in New Orleans in my life, which is Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, so we're out of order chronologically, but I happened to be home. My mom's birthday is in August, and as you know, the hurricane hit, or might remember, in August. I had that surreal experience of driving her out of New Orleans and making a joke, bye-bye house. It was a bye-bye house. She lost her home in the hurricane, but luckily that's all we lost. So many people lost so much more, their lives and everything, their relatives. So we were fortunate. I just want to bring up Katrina, though, because I think it's an important point to make. Katrina, for me, is a lot of lessons all rolled into one, but the one that's most appropriate tonight is the lesson of climate justice. And before anybody gets upset, let me just say I'm not saying Katrina was caused by climate change. I'm saying the storm that Katrina represents. The levees broke in Katrina, that didn't help. But the storm that Katrina represents, as it becomes more frequent, as it becomes more intense, I worry about the resources that we're going to need as a society to recover. As horrible as the initial response to Katrina was in the first days and weeks, over time the country responded pretty fully to try to rebuild this American city, and in fact the entire Gulf Coast as a result of Hurricane Katrina and Rita that happened the same summer. But now think about those things happening more and more frequently. And think about the discussions we've already heard about, wow, well, who should pay for this? And who should be responsible? And how much money should we as a federal government pay versus a state versus a locality to help communities recover? Think about what that means for justice and which communities are going to get left out of the equation of recovery and adaptation and mitigation of climate impacts. And I think you get a sense of the kind of justice issues that are embedded in the story of Katrina, but I don't think really talked about that often. All right, let's go back to the journey thing. There we are in New Orleans. And as it turned out, I didn't end up in the private sector. My first real job ended up being in Washington, D.C. That's the EPA building in Washington, D.C. Pretty nice, huh? In 1987, I started as a staff-level engineer at EPA. You know, back then, if you wanted to work on environmental issues, there was really, to me, only one place you should go in the whole world, which was the EPA. They were on the cutting edge of science, on the cutting edge of policy, on the cutting edge of legal issues, and I figured I wanted to go and understand and learn there. I worked there from 1987. In 2000, I became regional head of enforcement for EPA. And I really liked enforcement. That's a funny thing to say, but the reason is actually important for our lessons here tonight. Because the best part of enforcement wasn't the, you know, hey, we caught you doing something that you weren't supposed to be doing, and now you face a fine or a penalty. The best parts of enforcement were when smart companies, when forward-looking companies would say, okay, listen, we may or may not agree with this assessment, this fine that you're trying to levy, but we'd like to turn that into something a lot more positive. We'd like to take some of that money, some of that effort, and instead do something for the community. Maybe an education project, maybe a clean water project, maybe a clean air project, maybe diesel buses get converted to lower emission buses in an urban area. They were smart enough to see that what communities really wanted was a business that went beyond, that didn't look at enforcement as just a negative, but instead said, how can I turn this into an opportunity to think outside the box? In some ways, those kinds of settlements still happen all the time at the EPA and at state and other agencies. And I think in some ways they were the predecessor of the thinking that has led to the modern corporate sustainability movement. This idea that what's expected almost now of business is to go beyond you know, just meeting the letter of the law, if you will. In fact, there's an expectation, and I think smart companies are realizing the opportunity in being bold and brave and creative and looking for opportunities, even when it's not clear that opportunity is present. In short, I think it's really important to go beyond what's required and starting to ask what's possible. Now, that whole thing of possible is an interesting word, and we're going to use it a lot tonight because I think that's what Apple's all about in many, many ways. But for me, possible also became, the impossible became possible when in 2008, President-elect Obama asked me to run the EPA, to actually be the administrator of an agency that had given me my start. I get asked a lot about the last 4 years, the time at EPA in the first Obama administration. And the question I get asked the most is, what are you most proud of from those 4 years? And there's a lot of things, but I think for me, it was the endangerment finding. For those of you who don't know, the endangerment finding is a scientific finding. It says, it was made by EPA. We did it in, I think, December of 2009, and it says, we hereby find that the science shows that the emission of greenhouse gases, there are 6 of them in the finding, are endangering public health and welfare. Doesn't sound that hard, but in fact, that simple scientific finding has been litigated, had been held up for years for lots of reasons, not necessarily scientific, maybe political science, but certainly not the other kinds of science, but had been held up for many years. And so to be able to lead the agency and have my signature on that endangerment finding meant a lot to me personally, but also means a lot to our country. It marked the moment when we stopped denying the impact of climate change, and then, because of the way the Clean Air Act is written, when we then had to move by law to do something about it. Because you see, the Clean Air Act is pretty ingenious. It says once you find that a pollutant endangers public health and welfare, you must act. It's not a may, it's not a when you get around to it, it's you must act. And in fact, most of the things EPA has done on climate actually grow out of that scientific finding. So you have the science of the endangerment finding, which relied on the work of many, many scientists, including the IPCC work and Dr. Schneider's. But then you have the legal construct of the Clean Air Act on top of it, which required action. Okay, so that's what I was most proud of. But there were also other lessons. There were lessons from business, too. Lessons about, you know, what's possible, what we can do when we want to. Remember those settlements that turn opportunities or negatives into opportunities. I think The other thing that really impressed me was how often at EPA in the last 4 years, you could witness businesses who got it, who realized that part of what business can do so well, and it's so true and clear here in the Valley where innovation is so important, is ask itself constantly to redefine what's possible, to move up that chart, to say what's possible one day is certainly not bounding me for tomorrow. And if I feel bounded by what's required, I'm missing real opportunities for economic growth, for sustainability, and for environmental protection as well. Great example is those car rules. You know, we doubled fuel efficiency requirements for cars, 55 miles per gallon by 2025. Someday I won't be able to say that from memory, but it's still in the memory right now. But when you think about the businesses that are really looking at that requirement, they're going way beyond 55 miles per gallon. They're going way beyond gallons, right? They're looking at alternative types of fuels, alternative storage, alternative technologies. So many of my colleagues here in the administration work so hard to find ways to empower folks to go well beyond that requirement so that we could stand clearly and say we know we can get there, not only as a country, but as an economy as well. All right, so February 14, 2013, a little bit over a year ago, it was time to leave EPA. That was an ending. I remember the last day there. My dad was a mailman, remember that? The EPA building, that beautiful building, is actually the former home of the Postmaster General. And so I remember the last day in office, I walked for the last time across that postal seal, which I had to pass every day on my way into work, and realized the incredible gift and privilege that it had been to serve the public, as my dad did before me, for 26 years. But endings are good because endings lead to something else. And so 4 months later, here I come to California. Here we go. That's Apple. One infinite loop. It's got a green 1 in front, so they must have known I was coming. That's what I say. I also love the fact that we found a day when all the flags were perfect. But I tell people that on that day, June 10th, my first day at Apple, I immediately went from being a regulator to being a regulatee. From managing about 17,000 people at EPA to about 17 at Apple, give or take, but that's not really that much of an exaggeration. But the most important change, of course, was I finally got an iMac on my desk. It wasn't really possible at work. Of course, there were some other changes. I went from being an environmental leader, I'm kidding, to being an You don't change your stripes because you move from one place to another. At least I wasn't, and Tim certainly, my boss, didn't ask me to do so. That was part of the advantage and opportunity of coming to Apple. So people always ask me, why Apple? I guess fundamentally, it's a couple of things that really resonated with me at Apple. There really isn't this choice between the environment and the economy, something that I've been saying for a long time. I think we have to really challenge that notion even in ourselves, that every advance for the environment or for sustainability must come at the expense of the economy. It doesn't mean that there aren't transitions. It doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities and challenges in transitions, but there's also a need to define what's possible and to define the horizons, and Apple does that so well. Second reason is exactly the same thing at Apple as was at EPA, which is scale. We all search for opportunities to make a difference, and certainly at EPA, as the lead federal regulator, I felt that the work I did was very important. But when you think about Apple, when you think about the hundreds of millions of products that we sell, when you think about who we are, our weight, and sort of our place in the marketplace in general, the same scale is there. When Apple makes a change, it has the potential to change a lot. It can be as impactful as a regulation or an endangerment finding. And of course, back to our lessons, I find constantly that Apple walks the walk. Yes, we do what's required, but I think increasingly what's challenging us, and as you'll see, where we're gonna, I think, make our mark is to figure out how to change what's possible. Apple is a company that truly loves innovation. The other thing I get asked a lot is, so you did all of this, you know, you've got Apple doing all these wonderful environmental things and you haven't even been there a year. I didn't do it. You know, what happened at Apple is pretty organic. You have a company of innovative people who have figured out ways to move forward on a range of environmental issues, which we'll review, and I think it's instructive. I think one of the reasons is that Apple doesn't have a chief sustainability officer. That is not my title. Apple doesn't have an environmental group that sits alone and apart from the rest of the company. When we're talking about energy, we're talking about people who work in our facilities group every day and tackle a range of issues around facilities. When we talk about materials and making greener materials, you're talking about the same product designers and engineers who are thinking about what the next great thing will be. And so that idea of being embedded is pretty cool. And then you ask yourself, well, then why are you there? And I think it's because what a great company like that needs to do is to think about priorities, to really think about how to use that scale, how to use that innovation for the most possible from the private sector. Now, my boss, Tim Cook, often says, and said recently, that we want to leave the world better than we found it. You've seen that in our product design. Apple is known for a simple concept: focus and simplify. And we focus and simplify and focus and simplify until we assure ourselves that from a product perspective, what comes next is truly better than what was there before. I really like that idea of better. It's a really simple one, but it drives us. And I think it should be driving all of us to think about the role of the private sector in sustainability and in environmental protection. I want to take just a minute to show you what I mean.
Better. It's a powerful word and a powerful ideal. It makes us look at the world and want more than anything to change it for the better, to innovate, improve, to reinvent, to make it better. It's in our DNA. And better can't be better if it doesn't consider everything: our products, our values, and an even stronger commitment to the environment for the future, to use greener materials, less packaging, to do everything we can to keep our products out of landfills, changes that will benefit people as well as the planet. To us, better is a force of nature. It drives us to build things we never imagined. New data centers powered by the sun and wind. A new manufacturing facility that runs on 100% clean energy. And new product designs that make use of recycled materials. All ways to reduce our impact on the environment. We have a long way to go and a lot to learn. But now, more than ever, we will work to leave the world better than we found it and make the tools that inspire others to do the same.
So that video was shot on location at Apple facilities. Most of it at our Maiden, North Carolina data center. We'll talk about that in a second. Anybody recognize the narrator? Tim Cook, that's right, the CEO. I introduced him today and said, you know, he was a world-famous voice artist, but I think he did an amazing job, and it's because of the conviction there. That really is true, that it's in our DNA. All right, so you take a company that I think is very innovative, you take a company that goes beyond what's required, now we have to focus and simplify. So part of what we've been doing is trying to figure out where Apple can make the biggest difference, where we have the ability to really leave things better than we found it. And we've identified 3 priorities. First, using renewable energy and energy efficiency to reduce our impact on the changing climate, on climate change. Second, to find ways to use greener materials in our products and also in the processes to make our products. And third, to conserve the resources that we all need to thrive. I just want to spend a minute on each one of those. This is the image on our website. Remember, apple.com/environment. This is the image for climate change. I like reading it. Climate change is a real problem, so we're taking real action. I think it's really cool to work for a company that just says that up front, and I hope you appreciate it. Not many people will do that. On top of that, it's not just words on paper. You see, before I got to Apple, Apple executives a few years ago challenged themselves and the company to build a data center that works on renewable energy. Now, most of you know about data centers, but you have to really see one, and we'll see one in a second. You saw a little glimpse of the inside of one. Most people don't like to let those secrets out too much, but they are just huge buildings full of servers, computers that are running and drawing electricity and also generating a lot of heat. Everything's a toaster, after all. And keeping those machines cool is really important to making sure that they continue running. So data centers, a lot of people say that this whole digital revolution is great, but all we're doing is moving to using a lot of energy in data centers. Why was it really important for Apple to take on the challenge of building a data center that runs 100% on renewable energy? First, our customers and our shareholders care. Believe that that's the right thing. Don't want to be part of something that simply continues to contribute more and more carbon emissions to our degrading atmosphere. So doing the right thing is a core value at the company. But second, having a stable and reliable supply of electricity at prices that in many cases are comparable to or lower than we might pay for brown power is pretty cool if you're going to use a lot of electricity in those data centers. And maybe most importantly, climate change is a really hard problem. And lots of smart people in this room are working on ideas for adaptation and mitigation. And at Apple loves to solve hard problems. We're not trying to solve the entire one, but to say, you notice the words where we want to reduce our impact on climate change. I often joke, and this is so true, if you want to get folks at Apple really excited, here's what you do. Walk into a room and say, hey, I think we should build a data center that runs on 100% renewable energy, but it can't be done. It's impossible. Let that sit for a second. Walk out, go get some coffee. You might even want to have lunch at Cafe Max. Come back, and the folks you just challenged are still sitting around the table, because that's actually the moment that they begin to engage. That kind of innovation, the idea of stretching the boundaries of what is possible. So what happens when those innovative people put their mind to it? When you say, hey, we really want to make a commitment to renewable energy. First, let's talk about our corporate footprint in general. It makes sense to start with our corporate facilities. If you look, in 2010, we were about 35% renewable in our corporate facilities. By 2012, we were at 75%. And for Earth Day, oh, sorry about that. For Earth Day, I don't see that one. All right, we're at 94% renewable. This is one of our data centers. 94%, so that includes all of our corporate facilities, our facility in Cupertino, Austin, Cork, Munich, but also our data centers, which are at 100%. This is one of our 4 data centers. It's the one in Maiden, North Carolina. So just remember, data centers, think iTunes, think the App Store, think about all the interactions you have with Apple, and on top of that, think about every day, billions of messages and notifications every day through this data center. Hundreds of millions of photos that are getting shared through this data center, and tens of millions of video chats using FaceTime. Students, don't forget to FaceTime your mom. Really important, right? So that's what's going on in there, an incredible load of electricity and data moving. Every single one of our data centers today, this is not a goal, this is today, run on 100% renewable energy. They run on solar, they run on wind, they run on geothermal energy. So every time you download a song, or if you're talking to Siri, what we like to say is that our customers don't have to worry about what they're adding to the planet's carbon load, because Apple's thinking about that for you. You're not adding any carbon emissions to the planet. Now, there's real innovation in getting here, because there are a lot of people who said it couldn't be done. There's innovation in everything from building a LEED Platinum data center. This data center has been certified as LEED Platinum. That means it's energy efficient and it uses sustainable materials in its design and its construction. We think it's the only one that's of its size that's certified LEED Platinum that way. Remember, energy efficiency is really important. There's innovation in the work we had to do in North Carolina, where if we had used the mix of the power on the grid, which I think is somewhere near 50 or 60% coal and nuclear, we would have been, somewhere very short of 100% renewable power. And then there's also innovation in depth in the way you have to think about power to really be able to make a claim to say you're 100% renewable. So we like to think about three things: additionality, displacement, and accountability. Additionality, new power on the grid. This is additional new green power, and you'll see examples of that in a second. You saw some in the video, all those solar panels, new. Displace, we like to make sure that we're displacing brown power so that we're not simply moving the plug from here to there and somebody else is going to use the brown power. We are additional load, and so we're displacing from the overall load because we're using renewable. And then accountability. We want to make sure there's no double counting. We don't want to take credit for a renewable energy standard that the state might also have. We want to make sure that we are new and can account for every kilowatt hour that we're generating. This is an additional feature at Maiden. This is the country's largest fuel cell installation. I know what you're thinking. Fuel cells run on methane. So here, Apple is using biogas. We actually get it from a landfill not too far away because we want it to be carbon neutral. Between the solar farm and the fuel cells, we generate enough electricity to power about 14,000 homes per year. There's some other really cool and innovative features at the data center. This is actually a water tower. You're like, oh, okay, how innovative. But it's about thinking about the details. So we use, most of the time, 75% of the year, even though it's in North Carolina, we don't have a mechanical air conditioning unit running at the site. We're either using the outside air or we're using the outside air and water with evaporative cooling. Sometimes we want that water to be a little cooler, so when power rates are low because usage is low, we'll sometimes chill water and use it during the peak hours when electricity is more expensive but also usage is high, so we're cutting off and shaving those peaks. We use that chilled water, we store it here and then use it during the heat of the day, during the time when everybody's trying to use electricity. That's the kind of innovation and thinking that it takes to move to 100% renewable. In our Reno facility, outside Reno, Nevada, it's not actually in Reno, we're using local geothermal energy, but we're in the process of building a solar farm there. It uses what we call C7 panels. They're big mirrors. They concentrate the sun rays, so the silicon that you would see would be a lot smaller than in that video. So we spend time and effort concentrating the solar and then beaming it to the silicon panels. And there we're working with NV Energy. They own the land. We're building the solar farm, and they're going to operate it for us, all with no impact to the ratepayers in the surrounding area. And in our other data center in Oregon, in Prineville, we're using hydropower. You might say, uh-oh, hydropower, is that really renewable? It's micro-hydro. The power comes from the movement of water through irrigation canals in the area. The water's got to move anyway, so we're just taking that kinetic energy, but there's no additional impoundment. We're building that now. In the meantime, we're purchasing wind energy in Oregon. Where else for clean energy? Retail. You see we're at 94% of our facilities are at renewable. The big challenge is retail. Retail is tricky because we don't always own the meter. We can't just say, hey, here's the power we'd like to buy. Despite that, about half of our US stores, today we announced more than 120 of our stores in the US are running on clean energy. That includes Fifth Avenue and Soho and Manhattan. It includes Chicago's North Michigan Avenue. includes 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, and of course our hometown stores here in the area, San Francisco, University Avenue, Stanford Shopping Center as well. We purchase renewable energy from third-party suppliers, or we participate in utility green energy programs. And we're looking forward to the day when we can announce some real progress here as well. I want to talk about carbon footprinting for a second, because I think it's really another sign of innovation and the depth of thinking that's required if business really wants to make a dent here. This is our carbon footprint for Apple. And there's a couple of pretty important things to notice. The first is, that's a big number, 33.8 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions last year. But the second is to see just how much of the footprint are actually things that most companies don't calculate and certainly don't report to the level of detail that we do. So you see manufacturing. When we talk manufacturing, we're talking about starting with the raw materials in our product and owning all the emissions that it takes to get them out the ground, to get them refined, to get them processed, to alloy, to do whatever it is we need to do all the way through to the final product. But we don't stop when it becomes a product. We then look at the use of the product. So when you're out there using our product, we're taking responsibility for the energy that you're using. Obviously, the transportation of our product, and even the recycling, the energy it takes to transport and recycle our products as well. Why do we do that? Because if you don't measure it and own it and understand it, then you're not going to be driven to do anything about it. A lot of companies just report the first dot up there, 0.6 million tons, is our facilities. They say, hey, here's the air conditioning and the heating we use, here's the lighting we use in our facilities, here's our carbon footprint. Since 2009, Apple's been going far beyond that. What does that mean? So here's a great example of exactly what it means. It's on our website today. We use a lot of aluminum at Apple. This is our MacBook Air. It's a case. And it's got that unibody design on the keyboard and on the other piece. So it's kind of iconic for us to have a lot of aluminum. So our folks at Apple said, we've been using the industry standard assumptions when it comes to understanding our emissions of greenhouse gas for aluminum. We decided to go beyond that because we use so much of it, because it's so clearly a part of our product. And so we decided to go deeper. And we found out that the industry standard numbers are not accurate for us at all. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but they're up to 4 times. The emissions are actually higher, by, in some cases, a factor of 4 than what the industry standard would have us use. Now, that's what the majority of the industries out there that use aluminum are doing, but for us, if we really want to make a change, if we really want to drive those emissions down, we can't do that if we just use standard assumptions. So that means that our carbon footprint this year is actually higher than we thought it would be because we're using better numbers to calculate it. We're not doing a thing different. In fact, we thought our emissions would go down about 10%. They're actually up about 9%. I don't see that as the horrible news that you might think, because if we're not measuring and understanding it, then there's not going to be any change in it. So now, of course, our challenge is to take on that aluminum issue and figure out how to drive real change for our carbon footprint as a result. And we know that if we do that well, we can at least get a 9% reduction, if not more, in our carbon footprint. One other thing I just want to mention, one of my favorite announcements this year was when Apple said, listen, we're going to be opening a manufacturing facility. We're going to own it in Mesa, Arizona, and we're going to make something called Sapphire for stuff I can't talk to you about. But when we do make that Sapphire in Mesa, Arizona, we've committed that that manufacturing facility is going to run on 100% renewable energy as well. All right, we all know that energy efficiency is really important. Sometimes energy efficiency is overlooked. This is just gives you a sense of the efficiency of the products. This is our products in sleep mode. You can see back in 1998, 35 watts in sleep mode. Today we're at 0.9 watts, 97%, I think, reduction in the use of energy in sleep mode. really important. You can also get a sense for the reduction in material that's been incorporated as a result, so that's got to help our manufacturing footprint as well. We're proud of the fact, remember, we own the energy use phase of our carbon footprint, so we're proud of the fact that we're able to drive that down by making products that are a lot more energy efficient. If you look at the Energy Star standards, our notebooks are 7.6 times the Energy Star standard. Our desktop computers are almost 8 times the Energy Star standard. So that actually shows that we can drive that down, and that increases customer satisfaction by a lot. In fact, just a couple of nifty figures. If you want to meet the energy use of a single 60-watt household light bulb, you need 2,000 of our MagSafe adapters to use that same amount of energy. If you want to charge your iPhone once a day at normal rates in the US, for the whole year, you can charge it for about 51 cents. So energy efficiency is something that we want to continue to lead on and innovate around. Now, it's a climate lecture, but I feel like we spent a lot of time on climate. That's only one of our 3 priorities. You remember the other one was toxic chemicals. Apple actually has a pretty authentic space here, because long before restricted substances started to be listed in states like California and in places like Europe, Apple was driving certain toxins out of our products. These are the products that I hope will make you feel even better about using the products. But if you know me, when I was at EPA, and it's the chemical engineer in me, that old love Canal calling, I think toxins aren't talked about enough, studied enough, understood enough, and frankly regulated enough. But I think we believe that driving toxins out of our product and our processes is something that Apple can do. We've already done that in many cases: lead, mercury, arsenic, brominated flame retardants, not in our products, phthalates, not in our products, polyvinyl chloride, not in our cords. That's a pretty picture of a cord, right? But when Apple decided to become halogen-free, we had to figure out how to take polyvinyl chloride out of the cords. We had to come up with some elastomers that weren't chlorinated, weren't brominated, so we can make those cords. But then once we figured out, we found a supplier, found folks who could do it, we then had to work to get those cords certified in over 40 different regions around the world so we could include them with our products. Our cords are also phthalate-free. Our display glass and touch screens are arsenic-free. As I mentioned, we don't have the brominated flame retardants that are so much in the news these days in our cases and circuit boards and enclosures as well. We know it's the right thing to do, but I also think it's an incredible opportunity for leadership in the private sector from Apple. And our third priority is around the fact that we know that our planet's riches are limited. There are no unlimited resources, so we need to develop new ways to conserve the resources that we all share. Today, we announced that every Apple store will serve as an opportunity for take-back of any Apple products. We've always had a trade-in for, we've had a trade-in for a while for iPhones. We added a trade-in option in the US and Canada for iPads as well. It's a new program that we announced today as we mark Earth Day. This is an Apple collection event in Australia, and it's a true picture, and it's actually representative of our collection events. We've collected something like 421 million pounds of discarded equipment. We've kept that out of landfills. That's a cumulative amount since 1994. Collection's really important. We also audit and review the movement of that material. We want to make sure it's processed whenever possible in the region where we collect it. We want to make sure it's not ever shipped overseas for disposal. And we think that there are some real opportunities. As you can see in this picture, most of what we've collected in that 421 million pounds are not our products. So we think that the real frontier in resource efficiency is the idea of the circular economy. Is the idea that collection and recycling is great, but designing with resource efficiency in mind, with product reuse, with product resiliency, continuing to design compact products that last a long time, continuing to give free software upgrades so your product can be used a long time, all really important. And the next frontiers are to try to decide how to use less material, For example, our Mac Pro uses 74% less aluminum and steel than the generation before. We think that there are lots of opportunities for Apple to lead in this space, so more to come there as well. All right, I've talked a long time. I'm almost done, I promise. But I think it wouldn't be fair if I didn't end this survey of sort of the private sector and then what leadership and focusing and prioritization can look like in the private sector, public sector, and then private sector as well, without just giving a few thoughts. I've been at Apple, as you heard, a year. It's pretty exciting stuff, and I'm energized every day. But I think it wouldn't be a climate lecture if I didn't say that I think there's also an opportunity here for companies, for the private sector, to help move us from our national stasis on climate policy. And I actually don't think, and this could just be a knee-jerk reaction from giving too many speeches when I was heading the EPA, but I don't think speeches is how the private sector will do that. I think it's proof points. I think it's exactly the kinds of things that we talk about, that we talked about tonight, but also that we show on our website. You know, what companies can do is simply show that something can be done, and it doesn't harm the economy. It's not the end of the world. In fact, it's a real opportunity. That's where I think the private sector can really serve the public, that you can show that data centers can be run on renewable energy. You can join other companies, as we did, in saying through a climate declaration, the California Climate Declaration, that climate change, addressing climate change is the right thing to do, but it's also an opportunity for economic progress and for innovation. Government resources are shrinking. None of us are surprised at that. But it's an opportunity for companies to look at beyond what's required. It's short-sighted to think that requirements are shrinking. In fact, I believe that people are expecting more and more from companies and businesses, and future consumers are going to expect more and more as well. And so smart companies are going to look beyond a shrinking government and shrinking oversight to opportunities for innovation and the possibilities that come along with that. I think innovation is a huge competitive advantage. I think generating your own power is a great advantage. I think using less water is a great advantage. I think using less material is a huge advantage. I think the circular economy is going to prove to be one as well for those who take hold of that concept. We're actually really happy to think about competing when it comes to innovation, because we like that, but also competing around innovation for the environment, just to have a little fun. Here's an ad we ran in papers this morning. We actually think that what business can do is to show what can be done and then hopefully share what we've done so that we can debunk the notion that renewable energy is, as you can see here in Maiden, North Carolina, not ready for prime time. We all know that it is, and that it can be used, and that it can be cost effective, it can be good business. So I think the challenge for business right now is to answer those calls. And we at Apple are looking forward to asking some questions and answering some, and hopefully hearing answers from others out there. What's your equivalent of a data center that runs on renewable energy? What proof point can another business put out there so that we can call back to Washington, D.C. or to our state capitals and say, no, it's not theoretical anymore. We know it can be done. What's the equivalent of a cord that doesn't use PVC? What's the equivalent of a process that's based on using less aluminum, less steel to make a powerful product like the Mac Pro? I want to end with a story, just like I began with bunches of stories. This one has to do with our son Marcus. He's a freshman at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. That didn't work either. You know, not too long ago, Apple got some serious kudos from Greenpeace. We were happy about that, certainly. And one of his friends, one of Marcus's friends at school, sent him a message, and it was really kind of sweet, because the message said, hey, tell your mom I said congrats on making a difference in the world by spearheading good policy in the corporate world. First off, I thought it was really cool that my kid is getting credit for the cool stuff I'm doing. Yeah, right? But I really liked Vikram's last sentence. Congratulations on making a difference in the world by spearheading good policy in the corporate world. I really think that that's an indication of where we all have to go. It's an indication of opportunity, and it's an indication of where we intend to go as a company, and I sincerely hope others follow. It's an idea that the tables have turned, that the next roads of progress are going to be proof points that we all put forward, that the brains here at Stanford, in the Valley, certainly my colleagues at Apple put forward and give to the world as sort of mileposts on this journey towards sustainability. It is absolutely required. I think it is a responsibility. I think we have a responsibility to be open and to communicate with our customers and the public at large about what we're doing. I think we have a responsibility to face up to the messes of the past. It used to be Love Canal, and now we have a carbon mess on our hands. And I think corporations, companies have an obligation to face their part of that mess and do something about it. And I think we certainly haven't given up our responsibility to get financial return for our shareholders. That's important too. But the opportunity, the possibilities, if you will, are in the innovation. Freeing up innovation and economic growth to create a more prosperous and healthy planet. To change us from a world that will simply mitigate emissions and adapt to them to one that finds a way to thrive, to build an economy that thrives on that mitigation and adaptation. It's not going to be easy, but it's incredible possibilities. And I think it's a chance to leave things better than we found it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your comments and insights and sharing with us about your journey. So my name is Sharon. You've heard from Nick and Alessandra. We are all members of the Students for a Sustainable Stanford. And it's now my pleasure to open the floor to questions from the audience. We invite student audience members who have questions for Ms. Jackson to raise your hand, and a volunteer will come to you with a microphone. So raise it high so that they can see you. When you ask a question, please tell us your name and keep your question brief. This session will go until just before 9 p.m. Anyone have a question?
Hi, I'm Michelle, an undergraduate at Stanford. Thank you for coming in and telling us about your initiatives at Apple. It was interesting to hear about, on the manufacturing side, how you have been decreasing aluminum and other inputs. I'd be interested to hear more about how you deal with water and an input that's undervalued, really difficult to monitor just because it comes in so many forms. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I think many companies, including Apple, are looking at ideas around water, footprinting for water, just like we talked extensively about the carbon footprint. Apple's not as far along in its footprinting efforts, especially around our supply chain. We do great things. It's sort of the same story. From a facilities point of view, at our own facilities, we feel pretty good about the efforts we've made to conserve water and to be smart about water. But it's our supply chain where we think there's incredible opportunity to really look at recycling, reuse, minimization, and of course, water quantity is important, but also the quality of the water that we use. So we're actually, if you look on our supplier responsibility site, Apple's announced a clean water assessment program that's actually ongoing this year to begin to develop the kind of deep understanding of water use and water opportunities that we have around carbon as well. But it's an excellent point. Thanks.
Let's make sure we get some of the students at the front as well.
My name is Wynn. I'm a graduate of the business school. And with your experience in Washington and all the need for action out of Congress, what do you think the probability is that in my lifetime or anybody else's, we're going to see some significant activity here? Or are we going to continue the process that Congress goes through which is don't just stand there, don't just do something, sit there.
Well, I won't talk about your lifetime, I'll talk about mine, because yours is going to go on a long time, I'm sure. I'm an optimist by nature. I mean, part of the reason that I'm so passionate and adamant that we have to lead in the private sector is I think that's the catalyst that will move us forward. Right now, much of the debate that you hear is sort of this rhetoric, and it's been used time and time again for environmental issues, for justice issues, that any forward movement, any progress, any change is going to absolutely destroy the economy. And I think the only people who can offer an alternative to that is the private sector, who steps forward and says, we did it, it's done. You know, I think, and I'm I'm developing my thoughts about this, but I think it's not the private sector's job to necessarily stand up all day and think about making new public policy, but what we can do is get it done, innovate, and then offer and be willing to stand up and communicate about those proof points. The other reason I'm optimistic, so I think innovation is going to get us there. I think so many of my colleagues in the administration, two amazing ones, former colleagues who are here tonight, all we did was work to try to unleash and give some of the same emphasis to the innovation around clean energy and efficiency that we know will unleash a whole range of opportunities and possibilities. So that's happening. I also think that, how to say this nicely, newer consumers, those who are coming into the marketplace, have a pretty savvy understanding that science is science. And so I think there's going to be, in my view, personal view only, a sea change at some point as more and more people, as the weight of public opinion moves past having these debates, I don't like using debates, but discussions around climate science when we really should be having real debates and real thought and real policy around solutions. So I think those two things are going to be really important. And I think like anything else, the third piece is that actions are happening in the private sector, the state and local level, and in some cases internationally. And if you look at real environmental policy, big policies, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, oftentimes those started at the state and local level and then got transported somehow through the laboratories of democracy, as our founding fathers said, to Washington, D.C., where they became national policy. And so those things are all happening, and I'm hopeful that that will tip the balance.
Hey, my name is Eric, and I'm a junior. This seems like a really, really complex problem in general, and I was wondering if you could talk from your public sector work a little bit about like specific policy recommendations that you made or that you would suggest making now that you're in the private sector to tackle this problem or at least put a dent in the climate change problem that just seems so overwhelming, I guess, to a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, I hope you saw some of them today. I mean, when I worked in the public sector, I always enjoyed working with businesses that were forward-looking, that started to really understand that there were opportunities in dealing with environmental challenges, that didn't spend their resources just trying to fight the challenge, but instead really looked for solutions. And those are more common than you might think. I mean, you do have to get outside the bubble, the echo chamber that is sort of the Washington lobbying establishment, if you will, and it is formidable, as you saw Dr. Schneider was saying in the opening video. So listen, the policy solutions should actually follow the technology solutions. You know, there's a lot that's going on and a lot that has changed, whether it's the price drop in solar, whether it's the availability and the innovations coming around storage of energy, whether it's new frontiers in energy efficiency, all of these things that are happening, and California is a great example of it. Those opportunities are there. What's needed are policies that, if they're not going to help, at least don't hurt. You know, you can't keep giving people uncertainty in the business community around production tax credits and then wonder why, you know, the wind or the solar industry seems to go up and down in terms of availability. These questions, you know, sort of a firm and secure footing. I don't think you have to control it. I think you have to level the playing field and give people an honest chance to compete. So I think in general, that's what's needed. But back to the former question, I think at a minimum, we need to be willing to continue to affirm the science, not run away from it, and face the challenge head on, or we're going to have a lot of explaining to do to your generation and generations that come beyond. Oh, right here.
Hi.
I'm backing up.
My name is Emma. I'm a freshman here, and I'm just curious as to what Apple's policy on renewable energy credits is.
So the policy on renewable energy credits, we don't have a written policy, but in general, we prefer not to use them. It's not to say we never do. We do sometimes buy clean power, like you saw for our retail stores. We try to do direct access. So in general, what we prefer to do, and this is just our approach, is to say Apple has a certain load. Maybe it's a facility, an office facility, maybe it's a data center, maybe it's a retail store. Ideally, we can meet that through generation, either by contracting directly, direct access to clean power, or in the cases of where we can't do that, to meet 100% generating our own. That's how we now are the largest, you know, that facility in Maiden in the ads is the largest non-utility solar farm right now in the country. So that's sort of our preferred approach, and that meets that additionality and displacement and accountability. When we can't do that, we're going to have to look to find other opportunities. But I think it's been pretty remarkable, you know, Rex, the buying of credits somewhere else, when we have to do them, we prefer to make sure that they're local. We're not buying somewhere far away. We're trying to be in the same grid. We're trying to make sure we have really rigorous accounting. We want to, as much as possible, see that if we're buying into a REC program, it's actually used for new additional power, not just for power that would be there anyway. Those are all goals. They're all very ambitious. So I'm not standing here saying we're there right now, but I think our approach is that we want, you know, if you really want to leave something better, just taking the plug out of one socket and putting it in another, you can do that, but that doesn't make the change that we really need.
Hi, my name's Dominique. I'm a senior in product design here, and as a fellow New Orleanian, as a fellow, and Dominican high school graduate,
get out of here,
and engineer, you have been such a role model for me. And I was just wondering if you had any advice for women of color studying in these STEM fields.
Well, you don't need advice. Look at you at Stanford, senior in product design. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm so proud of you. Listen, you know, I think for, unfortunately, I mean, things have changed, but I think for all of us in STEM fields, there's a couple of things. First, just keep moving forward, right? Bring yourself and your authentic point of view to work. It can sometimes feel, I think, that that your point of view is maybe different, but different is really important. And different, when you're a person of color, you can be different in lots of different ways. So your gender and your culture may influence your thinking. So just, you know, keep as you leave here, understand, this is something I did a Women at Apple thing not long ago. Careers rarely do this. I mean, and I know you all are overachievers here at Stanford, and so you're waiting to do like this, like just start there. And some of you may. But, you know, understand that, you know, every experience needs to be about getting experience, getting your hands dirty, getting in there and really understanding deeply the field that you choose to be in. And then moving forward, maybe not always like this, but maybe sometimes like that. And the other thing is that it's not linear. Like I worked for 12, 15, I could sit here and try to remember, years at EPA doing a variety of things before I got my very first promotion. And then within less than 10 years, I was running EPA. So it's some, which could mean a lot of things. So I don't know if you should read too much. But, you know, sometimes it feels like I'll have people say, you know, I'm not sure if it's ever going to happen because you're looking for this to happen. And sometimes it's sort of like this, right? You sort of reach this critical mass of experience. And you need a group of mentors and advisors around you who can help determine whether you're really doing this or whether you're really gathering enough breadth and depth of understanding that you're suddenly going to see opportunities. And, you know, I'm not talking about just promotions and money. I'm talking about influence and impact and the ability to make a difference and do whatever your life's work is. So I think you just, you know, surround yourself with people who will give you a clear-eyed assessment of that. Realize that, you know, as special and talented as you undoubtedly are, you're going to get out there and find that some of the experiences you have, you can't. I mean, part of I weave this wonderful story, but when I was living all that story, I couldn't tell you, you know, where it was going to end. But they were each experiences that were deeply, you know, that were relevant and meaningful and broadening for me. So, congratulations, though.
Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a PhD student in electrical engineering. And as someone who works in a clean room a lot, I was surprised to hear you say that Apple is becoming a halogen-free company, because I think it would be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, I'll throw that challenge to you, to make microprocessors without using fluorine-based oxide etchants like hydrofluoric acid and sulfur hexafluoride. So I was just wondering if you could comment specifically on like that part of the supply chain and what Apple's really doing to make the toxic impact less.
Yeah, good point. I want to make sure I'm really clear. So taking them out of our products so that they don't show up in things like cords or glass is where Apple first made its mark in the toxin space. And you'll notice that the slide on toxins said we want to start to really eliminate more and more toxins from our products and from our processes. So that's going to require lots of work in lots of different areas. And I do not want to imply that we are halogen-free in all of our processes and all the things that happen as part of our supply chain. You give some great examples. For us, I think the frontier is to really look at the processes that we have and drive innovation in those processes that start to eliminate as much as possible and prevent pollution. And we have a couple of really great ideas, which I can't tell you yet. But I do think that one of the things that the company does really well is set pretty ambitious goals. So we usually don't say we want to cut it by a certain amount. We say we want to get rid of it. Because once you do that, that's what drives you to really think about something better, a next process. But you're absolutely right, so thank you for pointing out. We're not saying that we don't use those chemicals. We use plenty. In fact, if you looked at that image, you could see that obviously the making of electronics requires some pretty complex processes.
And we'll take our last question now.
One more. Who's last? Uh-oh. It's always the last question, so I always wish I had stopped with his question. Okay, pressure's on. What you got?
Okay, hopefully it's good. We'll see. My name's Peter. I'm an undergrad in CS and master's in atmosphere energy.
Oh, cool.
So your aluminum story got me thinking. So aluminum is really good from a design and branding perspective, but it might not be so good from an energy perspective since it's super energy intensive to refine. So could you speak a little bit about any disagreement or internal discord at Apple between you pushing for something environmental and some other group having some other
Never any disagreements at Apple. We just, right? Apple, we just move forward as one body. It's actually somewhat amazing. Actually, it's just the opposite. I don't think I'm telling stories out of school to say part of the culture at Apple, which I think is very much in line with how you're learning here at Stanford, is it's a bit of a debate and challenge culture. It's a bit of the kind of place where I can have ideas about design, even though I didn't study design in school. Sometimes that frustrates me. I can't tell you how many people at Apple think they have a better way to do something for the environment, and how many are smart enough, because there's so many smart people there, that they actually do. So one of the things I've learned to do really quickly is not to dismiss ideas, because they come from everywhere. In fact, I think the hardest thing is that focus and simplify motto. There's so many things that Apple could work on. Where can we actually focus our energy, our intent, and all that brain power and innovation to make a real difference for the world? So your question was around materials. I can guarantee you that there have been and will be lots and lots of great and spirited discussions about what the materials of the future should look like, about everything from what materials to how they're used, to how they're made, to where they're sourced, and to where we're going. And what I think will make a huge difference is something like what you saw here today. As the company embraces the idea that one of the dimensions that's as important as, say, the beauty of our product, that gorgeous, case, or the beauty of the design is also how it's made. As Tim said in the video, better can't be better if it doesn't consider everything. Yeah, we want better products, but what about our values? What about their impact on the environment? So I'm really looking forward to the fact that I think what we're really trying to do is give real voice and spirit to this idea that better lives beyond just the fact that we make, wonderful products. And in my opinion, some of the most amazing products in the world. But I think better for us is now about making some of the most amazing products for the planet. And that's the opportunity. So yeah, we're going to debate, and we're going to argue, and we're going to move forward, and we're not going to always get it right. We have a long way to go. We have a lot to learn. But it's good to be in this space. And for me, the fact that Apple's in this space, to me, means we're going to make a huge difference, and it's going to be better. And that's what motivates us, and what makes me get up every morning and makes me so happy, because it's my life's work. All right, I wish you all the rest of a really happy Earth Day. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an incredible honor.